You see a lot of things in the Arthashastra about how to distribute things to people, how to how to raise resources for these kind of actions. So there was a long fight, and it is said, legend says that Chandragupta was so unhappy and so sorrowful at this drought that he gave up his kingdom and he became a Jain monk and he went to Shravan Belavur. This is an aspect of the Mauryans which needs to be really studied and written down properly, because they had a very special focus, and Chanakya Kautilya had a special focus on saving the kingdom from calamities. And if you read chapter 8 on calamities, many of these calamities are the things that contribute to inequalities in the ancient past. And he had a kind of mitigating feature worked out for most of these things. So it is my considered opinion that inequality would not have been the kind of problem that it is. Also, you read a play. For example, if you read a play of Mass, then he describes common people also. So the way in which common people are described, are they in distress? Are they, hungry? Are they being exploited? No, they're not described like that. Namaste to everyone who is here. I am glad to be here for the second of the series of talks that I am giving on the Saptang state. Today we are going to talk about the Janpad. Just a little bit of a brush up of what we have heard the last time. So the whole purpose of this series of talks is to actually bring out in front of everyone our own Indic tradition of politics, administration, society, international relations, something which is ignored, almost completely ignored in the academic and in the mainstream narrative. So, how does anyone look at a state? A state today, as far as politics is concerned, domestic or international, is the most important concept we can think of. So, have Indians thought about it? Is there an Indian theory of the state? Indeed, there is. And what is it called? It is called the Saptang state theory. Each state, each kingdom has 7 elements. We saw what those 7 elements were. I will just repeat them. The first was the king. The second was the administration of the Amatya, so Swami and Amatya. The third, Janpad, land and the people, which we will consider today. The fourth is Durg. Then you have Dand, Durg and Danda, fort and army. Then you have Kosh, which is the treasury. And you have Mitra, which is international relations. We are going to look at all of them. So don't forget that this is not is something in isolation. When we look at the land and the people, we look at it in the context of everything else. Remember, we are trying to understand a kingdom, a state. In looking at the state through the 7 constituent elements, we are trying to understand each and every aspect of it. The illustrator of the Moral Oak series, Gitali Tare, I had spoken about it last time, about how together we have done the illustrations. I mean, I just provide the input, she's the one who does it. So welcome, Gitali. So to pick up the thread, today we are going to talk about Janpad, the land and the people. It is the third in this series of constituent elements which have been set out by Kautilya. Again, just remember that it is not just Kautilya who came up with this theory, but it is a very, very hoary and old one. It can be traced back to our Itihas Purans. It can be traced back to our Chaturdash Vidyasthanams. But Kautilya is the one who has given it a very good shape and discussed it in great depth and detail in the Arthashastra. Now it is in chapter 6 that the description of these 7 elements comes. And in chapter 6, a description of the elements that we want. So what is a good Janpad? What is a good king? What is a good Kosh? All that is in chapter 6. There is also a chapter 8 where there is a comparative description and comparative analysis of all these 7 elements. So for anyone who thinks, and there are a few people You will see a few theorists, even say Mark Micklitch or Patrick Oliver, who are very important as far as the academic, Western academic scheme of things goes for the Arthashastra. They have a kind of very dismissive view of this really being a proper theory. They seem to think that it's a kind of one-off mention and it doesn't really need a lot of description, or it doesn't merit much importance. I would beg to disagree, because there is an entire chapter in which all these elements are discussed in relation to each other, and in so doing, more and more elements of these, more and more aspects of these are clearly discussed. So, now on to the Janpad. So, when we have discussed that the king is there and a good administration is there, who will the administrators administer? Who will the king rule? Where will the king rule? Where will the administration work? Of course, in the Janpad. And the Janpad is not just the geographical area, it's also the people. Here, we will concentrate more on the people, because this is not a geography lesson. This is more about the polity and society of the Arthashastra and of the Indic tradition. But remember that when any state is considered, we must look at its geography. We must look at where it is. And, as far as strategic importance goes, as far as geopolitics goes, geography is never to be ignored. And nor does Kautilya ignore it. So let me give you a little bit of a description of what is written in the Arthashastra. I had occasion to mention last time that if any of you are seriously interested, you should read R.P. Kangle's translation of the Arthashastra, and that is the book I will be reading from right now. So this is chapter 6.1.8. So what is a good Janpad? It should have a strong position. It's a very big description. I'm going to give you just a few things. So it talks of the geographical position, a strong position in the center, in the frontier. It should be able to sustain itself. It should be able to help itself in times of distress and also help others. It should be able to give livelihood to all the people who live there. Remember, we are talking about the geography right now. So it should have good arable land, it should have water, it should have good soil, it should have good flora and fauna. All this is discussed in this shlok. All this is actually delineated in this shlok. Rain for water, it should have trade routes, water routes, land routes. It should have a lot of forests. So for those who are interested, mark 6.1.8 of the Arthashastra and read it in detail. Because it's very long, I'm just giving you some of the descriptions which are there of the geography of any Janpad. And, just to give you a taste of what actually is written by Kautilya, let me read it out to you in Sanskrit, just a little bit. And all those who do not know Sanskrit, just have a little bit of patience, because, this is from where all of it comes. So we must familiarize ourselves not only with the translations, but also with the original. So I will just give you a flavor. Madhye cha ante cha sthan vanatma dharana. This is strong in the center, strong in the frontiers, should be able to sustain itself. Swaraksha, able to guard itself. Swajiva, able to give itself livelihood. Shatrudveshi, that means it should always be looking out for its enemies and be able to vanquish enemies. Shakya Samanta, which is, referring to the administration. And it also then goes on to talk about the types of soil, forest, vegetation, flora, fauna, water, everything. This is as far as the geography is concerned. Now, what about the people? This was the land, and what about the people? So, the people are also described as all this geography needs to be beneficial to men, to the people who live there. It is only then that a Janpad can be set up over there, that a kingdom can be set up over there. Remember, this is the base of the Janpad. And in fact, although Kautilya puts it at number 3 in the Saptanga state, there are other rishis, there are other intellectuals who think of Janpad as more important than the administration and than the king. So they would like to put it first. And there is certainly something to be said about it. The land and the people, perhaps they are the most important. Kautilya, however, remember, puts it at number 3. because he thinks that the king and the administration are more important than the land and the people. So what should the people be like? So the people should be devoted to work. They should have a wise master. See a reference again to the king. They should also be loyal and honest. So these are the excellences of the Janpad and of the people in the Janpad. Karmashil, Karshoka, Bali, Varnaprayo, Bhakti Shuchi, Manushya, Iti, Janpad, Sampad. These are the excellences of the Janpad. Now you see, I have given you a kind of background. What are we talking about? So we are talking about the geography. Although I will not go into detail about it, think of our Indian subcontinent. Think of the way we are a peninsula. We have a kind of naturally sheltered situation because there's water around the lower part of the country, and at the top part you have mountains. So we are capable of shielding ourselves from our enemies. We have a lot of water in the Indian subcontinent. We have so many big rivers, whether it is the Ganga, Godavari, Kaveri, Sindhu, the old Saraswati. We are fully provided with water, with lakes, and the monsoon and the rainwater and plentiful rain is mentioned as one of the good things that is needed for a good Janpad. So the Indian subcontinent, if we try to look at it with the with a comparison of the things that Chanakya thought were important, the Indian subcontinent will be very well up as far as all these factors are concerned. It will merit a good 8 to 9 on 10. In some maybe 5 or 6, but generally 8 to 9 on 10. So that's as far as the geography is concerned, and I am not a geographer. So for that, maybe you need a geographer, and perhaps it's more interesting to know about the people in the context of the land rather than just the land itself. So now we go on to looking at the people. So what am I going to talk about with you? I'm going to devote 2 of these talks to Janpad because it's the people we are interested in. We want to know what they were like. For the illustration, I mean, I'm illustrating everything with reference to the model, so we want to know what they were like. As far as the Saptang state theory is concerned, if you think about knowing any country, even today, what do? You read about it. You read about its people. You read about what they like, what they don't like, what they do, what do they eat, what do they wear, where do they go, what are their interests. So we will pursue the same kind of idea. So what will I do in this talk? I am going to split the talk in 2, as I told you. So in this talk, I will talk about roti, kapda, or makan, food, clothing, and shelter. How was this? And I will obviously illustrate it with reference to the Mauryans because Kautilya was writing everything during the Mauryan period, and a lot of it was written with reference to the history of the Mauryans and of a period before it. So he refers very often to countries or kingdoms which existed before the Mauryans. In fact, many of his examples are also from the Itihas and Quran. So we do find the same kings and same characters that we find in the Itihas Quran tradition. So that's a very interesting kind of link, I would say. So I'm going to talk about in this session food, clothes, shelter. Then I will talk about travel and trade routes, entertainment and public spheres, and last but not least, the position of women. What was the position of women? When I talk to you about all these, I will be talking about all these things in the context of the Mauryans. But do not forget that we are trying to understand all this in the larger context of a state and how the people in that state live. To understand any country, whether it is your friend or whether it is your enemy, if it is your enemy, it's even more important to understand that country. It's okay if you don't understand your friends so well. It's imperative to understand your enemies. So these are the things that we look at. We will be looking at the Mauryans because this Saptang state theory that I am talking about is in the context of the Mauryans. It is for understanding also the past, because remember, I write historical fiction and historical non-fiction based on the Mauryans, and a lot of the things that I will be telling you today, you can read in my book Purnabhi. You can find more details of all the things I talk about in my book as well as in this web series. So, all right, now let us start with the concept of food. The concept of food was not something that the Mauryans it just dropped on their head. Obviously, this is a land, a civilization, which has been there for a very long time. The Mauryans were inheritors of a certain tradition, the Vedic tradition, and they were very much a part of that Vedic tradition. The way the Trai, etc. If you remember when I was talking about administration and about what everyone has to study, so the Ved Trai are the bedrock, and the Chaturdash Vidyasthanam. These are the base for society, for everything that society did. So there was a certain philosophy of food and a theory and practice of food. What was it? I'm sure if this was a quiz, all of you would answer immediately. Of course, it is Ayurveda. It was all based on the principles of Ayurveda. The Upanishads have said that man consists of the essence of food. So, what you eat is what you are. That is a basic tenet of the Indic idea of food. And this Indic idea of food was, of course, very much in prevalence and very much in practice during the modern period. So remember that the spiritual qualities of food were important, very important. So therefore, there was a great merit in hospitality. There was merit in sharing food. Food was not an individual item or individual activity. It was a group activity. So the spiritual aspects of food, the medicinal aspects of food were also very important. If we have time, maybe I do a session on Ayurveda, Sushrut and Charak. So the medicinal aspects of food were also very, very important. So what are, of course we can't talk much about Ayurveda in the short period, but I must definitely tell you that there are 6 basic um, types of food as far as Ayurveda is concerned: as sweet, sour, salty, astringent, pungent, and bitter. So you were supposed to have in every meal a little bit of all these. That was what was called. And of course, there are also different other categories: food that you chew, food that you suck, etc. And it is said that you should have something of each category in every meal. Now, this is as far as the background goes. How do we know what specifically the Mauryans ate? So, back to our good old Arthashastra, and I will share one shlok with you. I'll just share my screen, which is from the section which talks about agriculture. So, when it talks about agriculture, if you read all the items which are there in it, it tells you the things which were sown. And obviously, the things which were sown were the things which were eaten. That is, it is meant as a kind of description and instruction of Sarvadhanya, Pushpa, Phal, Shak, Kand, Mool, Valikya. So all these are the things that you need to sow and the things that you need to eat. Now, what about the details of these? We can discern the details of these from many different sources. And for those of you who are interested, I will tell you what sources they are and what you should refer to. I will give you what I have gleaned from all these sources. So, what did they eat as far as general food was concerned? So, the same things as we eat. They ate grains, they ate fruits, vegetables, roots, etc. There were three sowings as far as agriculture was concerned. In the first sowing was rice, millet, then priyangu, then there are some things which we don't eat any longer. But the second sowing you will understand: mudg, which is moong, mash, and other pulses. So here you have grains, you have pulses. Then in the third sowing was safflower, lentils, barley, wheat, mustard. So these are the kind of basic things that they ate. Now, rice, wheat, barley, millets, ragi, jowar, mash, masoor, mud, etc. are all basic things that they eat. Don't forget these three things: mash, masoor, and mud. These three pulses were the base of the food habits of the past. And you can see how similar it is. We still eat, many of us, no matter which part of the country we come from, we eat these things. Now, these foods, I will tell you later how they were processed. But how were they spiced up? What kinds of spices were there? So the spices were more or less the same as the kind of spices we use today. For example, pepper, hing, jeera, cloves, vinegar, coriander or dhania, cardamom, cinnamon, nutmeg, aloes. All of you can recognize all these because they are still a part of our kitchens. The unbroken tradition of the food that we eat, and of course, I'll talk about clothes later. That is one of the most interesting things about our civilizational past. It is true that a number of new things have been introduced, and we eat much more than what was eaten in the past because, well, time goes on and we interact with different cultures and different people, and new things come in. But the old things have not gone away. So, if we love mangoes, the Mauryans also loved mangoes. Bale, bear, banana, jackfruit, karonda, jamun, amla, coconut, all these were staples then and they are staples now. So, and what were the vegetables that they ate? So, vegetables were, there was there were a number of gourds, long gourd, the bitter gourd, all those gourds were eaten. Cucumber, lotus roots, methi, spinach, many kinds of sags, many leafy vegetables. So all this, I have given you some names, but what is the general impression that we get? The general impression that we get is that the food was that which was grown locally, because obviously it was food was perishable and we didn't have the ways of storing it that we have now. So it was grown locally, it was grown in three sowings, and a lot of it remains the same even today. Okay, so now we have the raw materials. So how was it cooked? How was the food processed? It is interesting to note that a lot of the processes which were used then and which we use now are those which add more nutrition to the food product that we are eating. For instance, fermenting, or for instance, sprouting. We are aware today that both fermenting and sprouting add a lot to the food that we are eating, and this was done even at that time. So the grains were ground, and of that, you could make rotis, or you could mix that powder with water or milk and then eat it. So these gruels, especially the gruel made out of powdered barley, were very popular. This powdered barley, mash, masoor, moong, chana, they were mixed. The powder was mixed with water, and guess what it was called? It was called supa. Doesn't it ring a bell? Supa is that which, from where comes the word soup? We are very well aware of soup today. So supa, and especially barley supa, was a basic food, very popular food for everyone. There were things which were, this powder was also often made into round balls and fried. And let me give you the examples of a couple of say desserts. This is something called apupa. So apupa was flour which was mixed with gur. I'm sure all of you know what gur is. And then it was fried and eaten. Now I come from Bihar, and we still eat something which is made in the same way and which is even called something similar. It's called pua. So I cannot but see a kind of straight line between the apupa of the Mauryans and the pua that we eat even today. So these were the different things. Now, for instance, take vada. All of us know what a vada is. So they also ate things which were made in the same way and called patakas. We eat papad. The same kind of papads were called purpatas. So even the words you see are so similar, and the items are also very, very similar. Now we move on from this to a special category, a special Indian category of food. What is that? Milk and milk products. Very heavy emphasis on milk and milk products. Milk and curds were also consumed fresh without much processing, but a little bit of processing was done because paneer, a kind of proto paneer, was also made, and curds were very, very popular. Other than that, what is the other very important thing made of milk? Ghee. Ghee was important for rituals, it was spiritually important, it was important for your food, it was important for many of your social rituals, many of your religious rituals. So it was a mainstay. And thus the importance of the cow, of cattle, because milk and milk products were consumed for taste, for health on a very, very, very large scale. Now, I've been talking only about a lot of sattvic food, so you may get the idea that everyone was vegetarian and they ate only sattvic food. That is not the case. Meat was definitely consumed, and meat was consumed mostly through hunting, but there was also animal husbandry and, keeping hens and ducks and other birds. So the meat was eaten, it was mostly as a result of hunting, but domestication also, and it was also mostly roasted. It was eaten by flavoring with spices and then roasting it. And interesting thing that I may tell you right now is that, this whole controversy about who discovered biryani, who made the first biryani. That goes on and on, especially in social media. It recurs over and over again. So let me tell you that meat and rice flavored together and cooked with spices has been a feature of ancient India. All the people who think it came with the Mughals just need to read the Mahabharata. They just need to read the Balkand of the Ramayana. It is also mentioned over there. So well, the vegetarians amongst us may not be so happy, but this has been a staple of Indian food for a very long time. Now, did they only eat or did they also drink something? Of course, they drank a lot of things. We've spoken of water, goes without saying. We've also spoken of milk. And there were also all kinds of fruit juices and beverages made from fruit. And by fermenting them, and there was also a lot of alcoholic beverages made. The Arthashastra has a lot of focus on alcoholic beverages because these are very popular. These were sold by the state, and people were themselves not allowed to make alcoholic beverages. They had to buy it only from the state. Only during festival times they could make it themselves and drink it. So they made a number of different, and then things called Ayurvedic arishtas were made, and many tonics were made, but also things which were just nice to drink. Mahasurs were made, and anyone who's interested, read the Arthashastra for detailed recipes. It is one of the to do in my to do list is at the top to try out some of the Arthashastra recipes. Mango Mahasur. So they tell you, put this, put that, mix this, mix that. One day I'm going to do that and see what I come up with. And if we really had those resources, we should have a little club which does these things and makes all those old recipes. So these alcoholic beverages were made in the country. They were also imported. So from Afghanistan, a lot of wines were imported. One was called the Hara Hurak. It was imported from Afghanistan. Later, of course, Chandragupta put part of Afghanistan in the same in his own kingdom, so then it was no longer an import. But earlier, they were also imported from Afghanistan. So today we are discovering a lot of superfoods and learning the importance of processes such as parching, puffing, sprouting, pickling, blending of proteins. All these things were very much there, and not only in the incipient stage, but brought to a great level of sophistication. I will just again show you the picture of a Mauryan kitchen. So I would again point out a few things. The kitchens were not closed inside the house, and we are used to now see they are very much outside. And this is the kitchen of a big band. a big courtier or a somebody who's very rich, so it's a nice complicated kitchen. See that there are many things going on. Somebody is making a roti, somebody is pounding something, somebody is probably maybe making makhan out of ghee, and somebody is also cooking a broth. So our illustrator will tell us all the things that she had in mind when she made this illustration of the modern kitchen. But this is just also to bring out to you the similarities between kitchens then and kitchens now in terms of processes. Of course, we don't have open fires, and now we don't, we grind our grains. We don't grind it like that. We get it in a packet, but the processes remain somewhat similar, and that is what I actually want to point out by showing you this modern kitchen. So this is as far as food is concerned, and now I will go on to clothes. Clothes. So first we need to know what kind of materials were there. Then we need to know how they wore those clothes. So what kind of materials were there? Cotton. India has always been the land of cotton. So obviously cotton. India has also been the land of silk. A little note over here. China has often contended that silk was discovered and silk was first made in China. There have been certain recent discoveries in Channudari which are putting this theory to rest. So either it was a kind of parallel discovery, or perhaps the discovery of silk in India was much older. Now, a certain confusion arises also because even in the ancient past, even during modern times or a little later, there was certain silk which was imported from China. But that silk was different from the wild silk that was from the wild silk which was made in India. And if we have found remains which are as old as the Saraswati Sindhu civilization, and they have been found in Channudar, it stands to reason that silk has also been around, silk has also been a part of the Indian subcontinent for a very long time. So, what does Kautilya mention? What materials does he mention? Wool, so that is sheep wool, and the wool blankets of Punjab and Nepal have been mentioned as being very great things of that period. Then cotton, silk, hemp, flax, and an interesting thing which we don't use any longer, that is bark fibers. So these bark fibers were the very fine ones which were called dupul, and the slightly dupul and shom were very fine ones. And there were common ones which were worn, bark fibers are worn by ascetics. So it is a sign of asceticism to wear bark fibers. As far as cotton is concerned, it's generally for commoners, but there were some special, very fine kinds of cotton. They were called Tulapansi from central India, and something which we still love to wear, Madurai cotton. So Madurai cotton has also been mentioned in the Arthashastra as one of the best varieties of cotton found in the subcontinent. So what kinds of different silks were there? So the pre-Chinese wild silk, which was made from the wild silkworm, this was called crochet. Then there was mulberry silk or patrona, that which is still called pat in Assam and pattu in Tamil Nadu. And please see, I am wearing a pat sari, an Assamese silk pat sari. So you see the continuity every time I talk of anything, every time the continuity will go on striking you all the time. Other kinds of silk were chinam sook, kasar, muga, and there was a special thing called a jali pattika. What is that? That is weaving gold, silver, and textile wires together. What is that? That is brocade. So the mention of brocade is also there in the Rigveda, and the mention of brocade is also there in texts which are closer to the modern period. So we also had brocade at that time. Textiles were obviously, they were woven. Cotton always has to be pulled into strings and then it has to be woven, dyed. It was also printed. And resist dyeing, hand printing, all these things, all these technologies existed. There was also felting together of cloth. Important thing to remember, interesting thing to remember is that the making of textiles was mostly in the hands of women. Textile weaving was a woman-centric industry and factory. run by the Mauryan state, often as a means of providing for poor indigent and women who had no support of any kind. So the state helped them by giving them this work of weaving, and they got money out of it. So now this is as far as the materials are concerned. How did they wear it? So I will show you two very fashionable people. I will show you the Mauryan man and the Mauryan woman, and I'll tell you what they were wearing. This is from based on a sculpture from a stupa at Bharut in Madhya Pradesh. There were three things that everyone wore: man, woman, child, anyone. That was the Uttariya, Antariya, and the Kayaband. So the Uttariya was that which was on top. See that shawl-like thing on top? That is the Uttariya. The Antariya is what you wear in the lower half of the body, normally tied around the waist or the hips. And what kept it in place? That was the Kayaband. The Kayaband was that which was tied on the waist or the hips to keep your Antariya in place. These three, Uttariya, Antariya, Kayaband, these are the basics of clothing for everyone. So what were the specifics? For a man, the thing that he wore on his head, what we call now a pagdi, or what then was called an ushnish. Often the hair was tied up into a little round. Can you see a little round ball over here? So the hair was tied into a little ball over here, and the cloth pagdi was tied over the hair. That was one special thing. And men in ancient India or men in the ancient past loved to flaunt their jewelry. I am afraid men of today no longer have the privilege. It's not seen as manly to wear jewelry. Such was not the case in the past. This man is wearing a lot of jewelry, but I would still say that even more of this kind of jewelry was in vogue. So you can see he's wearing a necklace, he's wearing armbands, he's also wearing something on his wrists, he's also wearing earrings, and these were of many, many different types. You can see that, can you see? No, you can't actually. He's wearing kundals. I don't know if it is that clear, but he's wearing kundals. And in the hand which is hidden, there could well also be angutis, angulikas. So men wore all these things. And sometimes, can you see the longer one? There's a line coming down here, that is a lambanam. The smaller one is a kanthar, and the longer one is a lambanam. So there were so many different varieties of these. I can do a session only on jewelry, only on the varieties of necklaces. I'm just giving you a small flavor over here. So this is as far as the Mauryan man is concerned. Now I will show you a Mauryan woman. So this stylish lady is again from the Mauryan Sunga period and again from Bharut. So what is she wearing? First, please notice, it is again the Uttariya, the Antariya, and the Kayaband. The basics are there. But what about extras? So women often wore more than one Uttariya. So this one, see, she has one on the head. And she also has one wrapped around like that on the head and one on the shoulder, which you can't see that well. She is also wearing an Antariya and a Kayaband, and there is something else which is actually called as a kind of, mekhla, which is around the waist. A Kayaband is always made out of cloth and tied around the waist. A mekhla is always made out of metal. So the rich women wore gold mekhlas, the poorer women would have worn some commoner metal, but a mekhla was a metal belt and the Kayaband was a cloth belt. So here she is wearing the Kayaband, Antariya, Uttariya, and also a mekhla. And also now, look at the way she has tied her Antariya. This is called the Kacha style. What is the Kacha style? The end of the Antariya is taken between the legs and tucked at the back. So that becomes a Kacha style. There are so many other styles. There is a Matshavalak style which was more popular in the Vedic period. So that is like fish scales. So then the style of your draping will be as if There are fish scales. It's styled like fish scales. Or you can have a Bhair Nivasini. A Bhair Nivasini is like a tubular skirt. There was also a kind of the same thing as a lehenga. A Bhair Nivasini is like the modern lehenga, which is still popular. So I'm just giving you a little flavor. Remember, this is a huge topic in itself. And I can tell you of so many different styles of tying everything for men as well as for women, because everyone showed off their individuality by tying their clothes in different ways. Then you have the jewelry of this lady. Start from the top and you can see that there is something called a sitara over here. A sitara is like a bindi. Now I have a very simple cloth one, but this lady has a gemstone sitara. So it could be made of sapphire, it could be made of gold, it could be made out of any gemstone. There could be, you can't see the back of her head, but there is a hair ornament called a chudamani. Then there are earrings of so many different types: jhimki, tal, patra, kanak kamal, kundal, so many different kinds of earrings. What else do you have? Angulikas in the fingers. In the neck, you have a kanthar, and there is also the slightly longer one that you can see is actually a falakhar. Then there were things, if you wore one strand, it was an ekavalli. If you wore 7 strands, it was a saptavalli or a dashvalli. So you wore different kinds of strand, different numbers of strands. Again, there is a long list of types of necklaces. Then in the arms, she wears keyur. Wrist, she is wearing a kangan, balay. She is wearing anklets, kada. So you see from tip to toe, this one is a she is a prosperous, rich courtier. So she is wearing very expensive clothes. So people wore simpler clothes. I'll show you a couple of simpler clothes also. Now, what are the general statements that we can make about clothes? I told you one, that it has 3 things: the Antariya, Uttariya, and the Kayaband. The other thing is, it was all unstitched cloth, which was draped. What about stitched cloth? During the Mauryan period, yes, stitched cloth had made it entry because of the links with the Greeks and the links with some of the Central Asians. So some people wore stitched cloth, and who were those people? Soldiers. The soldiers' dresses were often made of stitched cloth, but average people wore unstitched cloth. The cholis or cholaks, etc., they were there a bit in this period, but it took another 200-300 years for them to become really normal wear. So the upper part of the body was bare for women as well as for men. So unstitched cloth is one of the takeaways. Drapery is another one of the takeaways. What is the third takeaway? The third takeaway is that clothes were gender neutral. Have you noticed that I am using the same words for clothes for men as well as for women? They wore the Antariya, Uttariya, Kaya Bandhan jewelry, both men and women. What does gender neutral clothing say for the state of society? Can you talk about gender neutral clothing today? What is a skirt? Does a man wear a skirt? And a woman wearing trousers is a woman wearing a man's dress. We have got this from Western Abrahamic civilization. For us, clothes were gender neutral. There was absolutely no discrimination. So there was a piece of cloth. You gave it to a man, he draped it in a different way. You gave it to a woman, she draped it in a different way. So remember this. These 3 takeaways are extremely important. What I will end with, I will end this section with a little bit of a peep into how clothes may have evolved, but they remain the same. I am wearing a sari. And the sari that I wear today is, of course, it was the women of Jorasanko and it was Rabindranath Tagore's family who actually popularized this kind of wearing of a sari. But it still owes its beginnings to the Antariya, Uttariya, and the Kayaband and the Cholak. And often some of the traditional ways of wearing a sari actually start in the same way with the Nivi Band that the Antariya had started with all those years ago. So the sari that of today is kind of, like a stylized Uttariya. The petticoat is like an Antariya, and we wear a chola. Now I will just show you an ancient dhoti and 2 ancient saris. So can you see a man wearing a dhoti? It could as well be a man walking around in Uttar Pradesh or Bihar today, but no. This man comes from 2nd century BC Mathura, and he is wearing a dhoti so much like one of the dhotis that anyone today would wear. And I will show you pictures of two saris also, again from Mathura. Can you see these two saris? Can you see that then we can recognize them as saris of today, but these are also 2nd century BCE figures. So the point I'm making here is never underestimate how much we are rooted in our past, even though we've forgotten. Just scratch the surface and the past will come tumbling out. We just need to scratch the surface and realize all of us, when look at me, the kind of clothes and things that I'm wearing. There are examples from the Indus Valley civilization. For example, bangles. Do you know who first made bangles and who first wore bangles? They're first been found in the Saraswati Sindhu civilization. So these come from there. Look at the Sindhu that I'm wearing. The Sindhu also comes from the Saraswati Sindhu civilization. So if you look at me, an average person, an average Indian woman, I reflect so many eras of Indian history and keep scratching the surface and knowing more about the past and the roots of what we have, and we'll find more and more of these connections everywhere. So I think that's as far as I have time for, as far as clothes are concerned. Now we'll go on to where did they live? Where did people live? So they lived in cities, they lived in towns, villages, they also lived in forests, and they made houses. They made houses out of mud, they made houses out of stone, daub and wattle. They also made houses out of brick and mud, wood, and decorations. The Mauryans are famous for wooden buildings. Now, you would not be able to say it from any of the things that have still survived, because wood is a perishable material. So we do not really have examples except in Kumrar near Patna. There are some huge structures of wood found which they say belonged to the palace of the Mauryans. So that is about the only wooden thing which is left. But you can read from texts and you can read from inscriptions that wooden carving was very, very seminal to the construction and decoration of the dwellings that the Mauryans lived in. So there's something. Let's look at the palace of the Mauryans. Okay, I will also show you a palace. Now, this Mauryan palace, this is as described in the Arthashastra, and an artist's representation of this, which was used in my book Purnabhi. So I will just show you the palace. We also know that perhaps the name of the palace of the Mauryans was Sugang Prasad. This comes from the Mudra Rakshas. That is the name of the palace, and Mudra Rakshas is about the enthronement of Chandragupta Maurya. So maybe we can take it as true. So you can see that the king had obviously a very kingly palace. His bedchamber, guards, council chamber, horses, elephants, chariots, etc. All very beautifully done, all very beautifully decorated. From descriptions of that period, we also know that there was a signature Mauryan design. What was that? There were golden vines or silver vines which were carved around these wooden pillars, and small little golden birds sat on these silver vines. So this creeper and bird design is a signal and a signature Mauryan motif. Silver vines and small golden birds. Where do we get this from? I have gleaned this description from Buddhist literature. There's a lot written about the Mauryans in Buddhist literature. So this is what this comes from. So you see the level of prosperity was such that they decorated their palaces and houses with gold and silver, and of course paintings and murals and all those other things. I will also I wish I could show you some more things, but again, for lack of time, but you can go and watch Maurya Lok and see how different houses were constructed. So there were different houses for town, different houses for villages, for courtiers, then there were farmers' houses, then there were monasteries, there were gurukuls, then there were also religious structures, temples, and people who used to live in temples. And again, the Buddhist stupas and vihars and the way they were constructed. So if you watch this episode on Maurya Lok, you'll be able to see many more of these things. So normally, the houses were open together with nature. There was a courtyard. They were built around courtyards and they were multi-story. And there were normally stairs to reach the top columns, and there were also pillars. So these pillars, I will have occasion to talk about Mauryan pillars next time, but these pillars were made in a very particular Mauryan style, and they had capitals which were, there were lotuses made on those capitals, crocodiles, lions heads, etc. So this was a very high level of decoration, a very high level of achievement in the area of Shilpa Shastra. Again, I have later occasion to talk about Vastu Shilp in the next time, but just as a kind of introduction. So these were the houses. And what about the cities and towns? So they were, the city of Patliputra was supposedly probably the biggest in the world at the time of, and it is estimated that it had 140,000 inhabitants. There were also smaller cities. Remember those four capitals I told you about? They would be about, say, 12,000 people, etc. Then there were even smaller cities, say like Ayodhya, Kapilvastu, Kashi. These were also well-known cities, but not that big. Apart from that, of course, there were smaller villages. I will show you the city of Patliputra as taken from the Arthashastra. The entire description comes in the Arthashastra for anyone who wants to read it. So here is the city of Patliputra. So it was, all the roads ran at right angles. It was organized in a very specific way. Who was to live where, which business was to operate where, what was to happen where. It was all organized very well. There were many civic rules and regulations about where you could build the house, how far it should be from the other house, how broad the road should be, how much distance there should be between the road and the house, what were the common things that you had to do, like you had to keep water on the road. You had to keep the road in front of your house properly watered. So there were some civic duties, there were some civic rules. So spitting. So I'll show you just some of the things which I hear. See, there's a treasury. This is to the northeast is the place where the scholars and purohits used to live. Then there was a place for yagyas, which is called the ritual area. Then there was water storage, elephant stables. This is the city center. Then there is and in the city center, remember, would be living the king. Then you can see records and audits office. Remember the Akshapatal Adhyaksh? So he would operate from here. This is the armory where the army would operate from. And remember our Sannidhatri, who used to make so many, who was supposed to make so many warehouses and storehouses. You can see. You can see the storehouse for forest produce. You can see the commodity warehouse. And if I just zoom out a little bit more, see where the Vaishya, that is the business, all the businesses were supposed to be here. Can you see to the northwest the hospitals? Can you see the temple? So everything is set down in a particular chapter in the Arthashastra. This is illustration is from my book Urnabi 1, because a lot of the plot hinges around the map of the city and the map of party and the map of the palace. What I was telling you is that spitting, defecation, and dirtying the city, they were subject to great fines. So you could not do all these things and dirty the city. So perhaps the average person from Patliputra lived in a cleaner, more organized, and better city than we do today, because a lot of care was taken to keep the city organized and clean. Two of the things that we need most from our urban spaces. What did you gather? What is a takeaway from this description of the way people lived, what they ate and what they wore and what they did? That it was a very prosperous and very sophisticated society. Things were not done without deep thought. There was a philosophy of everything. If there was Ayurveda, there was also Shilp Shastra. And it is very interesting to note the links between clothing and yoga. The places where you tied your clothes, where they were tight, where they were loose, were according to the physiology of the human body. So remember, the same philosophy, the same ideas informed all these things. And since it was such a prosperous society, it could afford to not only spend time thinking about it, but use the most complex, expensive, perhaps even rare items that were possible to be used for these things. Now, everyone did not use gold and gemstones and did not live in palaces. But the average level of prosperity from what you can glean from the texts of that period was very, very high. There was little poverty and there was no starvation because there was always, you lived in a community. If you didn't have anything, then other people came to help. So we perhaps lived in a less technologically advanced but better society in the past in terms of the thought that went behind it and the kind of support systems you had. And then again, cities and spaces were much cleaner and much more beautiful than today. Nobody can call Delhi beautiful or Bombay beautiful. It's too much of a stretch of the imagination. So perhaps we've lost that connect with nature and the beauty which was part of our lives. So now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about today, I end the section on food, clothing, and shelter. The other thing I wanted to talk about today was travel and trade routes. So, travel is something that we tend to think that we've perfected. Modern society has perfected travel, and we've all become great global travelers in this globalized world. That's not strictly true. Because even though the means and mode of communication was slow, human beings have never ever been deterred from traveling. Migration was the first travel. Human beings migrated and covered the globe. So also was travel a part of ancient societies. Travel was a part of the lives of people in modern India. People normally traveled for two or three basic things. First was, of course, the army traveled a lot. So it was for fighting. Then you also traveled for to visit Tirth Sthans. That was a very important thing. You traveled for trade because trade was, like I told you last time, it underpinned modern society. You traveled, tradespeople traveled, Satvahaks traveled, and they brought goods from place A to place B, etc. Then you also traveled for intellectual pursuits because there were big gurukuls and kings who supported intellectuals and they had big shastras. So people traveled for all these things. These are generally the reasons why people traveled. Now, it was a long time ago. So, what was the situation in terms of the infrastructure? Were there roads? What did you use? What kind of things did you only walk, or did you have something else? So yes, there were roads and there were trade routes. There were trade routes in India, in fact, have been developed perhaps even before the Saraswati Sindhu civilization came into its own. If there is a very interesting research paper, her PhD thesis by Nayanjot Lahiri, in which she has explored trade routes of the Indian subcontinent, within the Indian subcontinent, and also outside towards the world. And if you are interested, it has been published in book form. So Nayanjot Lahiri's PhD thesis is, of course, it's a very good source. There are others also, but it's a very good source for understanding the way in which, in the really hoary past, which we don't know about, these trade routes had already been developed. Now, I will show you the two main trade routes of India. One was called the Uttar Path and the other was called the Dakshin Path. The Uttar Path was in the north and the Dakshin Path was in the south. And they consisted of roads which connected places to each other. They also consisted of riverine routes because there are so many rivers. And they consisted of travel domestically. And I will show you how they connected up with travel internationally. So let me show you the Uttar Path. Okay, so you see, this is the Uttar Path, which was in the north. These are the different places which were there, which were important trade centers. So these were the places where most of the trade used to happen. And there were the Mauryans used to run special customs departments to take their own bit, little bit of tax from all this. So you see how it goes from the middle of the country to the top. It goes to the top, and this is the Uttarakhand. Now, Kaushambi has been marked in red because this was a place where the northern and southern trade routes crossed. You can see the important cities on these trade routes: Patliputra, Kashi, Kaushambi, Hastinapur, Takshashila, Mathura, Tamralipti, Chandraketugarh, which is now in Bangladesh, by the way. So these are the important places in the northern trade routes, and I will now show you the southern trade route. So you see how it went down to the south, and it meets the northern trade route at Kaushambi. And that is why Kaushambi, Prayag is seen as the center of the world for us, because everyone from everywhere across the world, because remember these domestic trade routes then went and joined international trade routes. So actually the entire world came and met at Kaushambi or at Prayag. And it is still the place where our own timeline, the Indian timeline, that's where it passes from even today, 87.5 degrees. So these, remember, Bharu Kutch and Sopara, these have a link with the Indus Valley civilization. Because Bharu Kutch is a really, really very old port, and so is Sopara. So these are the kind of routes along which people traveled. They traveled for all the reasons that I have told you. Now, what were the things that they used to travel? Of course, there were horses, elephants, ox carts, simple walking, and maybe donkeys, mules. So all these were according to your own whatever resources you had, you could use these to travel on. What about water? So on water, obviously by boats and ships, and you can see some of the interesting illustrations we have made of boats and ships. If you go and check out this episode, it is episode 7, so you'll be able to see. And we've made those after a great deal of reference to a lot of texts and sculptures, etc., about how those boats and ships would have looked. So water is fine. For boats and ships, you don't need a road, but you need roads for travel by you need roads on the surface if you have to travel by ox cart or horse or chariot, or if you have to walk. And roads are a very big preoccupation of the moderns. So the roads were made by clearing the surface of all obstacles. Then they were upraised. So the whole road was a little upraised from the rest of the land. Trees were planted on the sides, and wells were also dug from time to time so that the travelers would get water. Now, why am I saying this? Just in general terms? No, all this is from the Arthashastra, and the Arthashastra describes the names of those roads. It gives you the dimensions of those roads. For example, if it was a Rajpath, then this should be the dimension. And it even goes down to smaller and smaller, the ones which were in the provinces, etc. And the names and dimensions of these, again, as I say, if you go back and watch that episode, you'll be able to see it. Just a bit of background is that roads have been there in the Indian subcontinent for a very long time, and the construction of roads and the description of roads has been found, right? Not just roads, boats, water, etc. If you start from the Rigveda, and also since I have translated the Valmiki Ramayana, I remember more of it offhand. So if you read the Ramayana, there is a certain time when Bharat goes to meet Sri Ram, when Sri Ram has left for his exile, but he has still not gone into the deep forest. So there's a huge description of how Bharat takes the entire army, and then he moves with the army towards where Sri Ram is there with Sita ji and Lakshman. Now, in that description, Valmiki writes a lot about the people who are there with the army, and main amongst those people are those who build the roads. The description of how those roads are built and how those roads are made easy to traverse and easy to travel. So roads have been around in the Indian subcontinent and are a very important part of the Janpath, because if the Janpath is as big as the Indian subcontinent, then you have to have some way of traversing it. Otherwise, you cannot get the kingdom working as a unit. There will be no communication, there will be no commerce, then there will be difficulties in security. So communication, roads, infrastructure, basic for the Janpad, mentioned by Kautilya, where he does say what kind of road there is, what kind of obstructions are there, and how you should be able to make good trade routes. He mentions that in chapter 6 about how you should be able to make good trade routes, and we have found those trade routes for the Mauryaans. Another very big source for information about roads, travel, and the guest houses are the inscriptions that we have found. Mauryan inscriptions give a lot of descriptions of wells, guest houses, etc. So, there were very good guest houses provided by the Mauryans along these routes. Those guest houses had places for you to stay at night. Some of them even offered you food, and they offered you security, and then you could go off again in the morning. So these were built only for the benefit of those who were traveling. So you see that travel was important, it was taken care of, and the state thought about it, the state talked about it, and did a lot of things to make things easy for the person who was traveling. Now, this is as far as travel is concerned. Now, what about some of the other things I want to speak of? What time is it? This particular section I have called as travel, entertainment, and public spaces. So let me talk about entertainment. What was the entertainment? Talking to each other and meeting each other was the biggest entertainment. Perhaps today it's a little bit down because we spend maybe more time watching films or doing Twitter or whatever it is than talking to people. But meeting people was a very big part of entertainment. So there were very specific kinds of parties which were held. Now these parties are mentioned often in the Arthashastra in different contexts. Like they say that if an Amatya does some really good work, then the king should reward him with this kind of party, which takes him on a boat cruise across the river. So they have been mentioned in different contexts. Another source for knowing these is the Kam Sutra, because the Kam Sutra is a lot about how people should live, how the subject of the Kam Sutra is a Nagarak. The Nagarak is the main person, what he should do, what he should not do, how he should behave, and his entire life, including his sexual life, of course. That's what the Kam Sutra is often about. But the Kam Sutra is a kind of manual of social interaction, manual of social life. And it mentions a lot of parties. So, what kind of parties were there? There were three kinds of parties: Utsav, Samaj, and Vihar. So, Utsav were the festivals and the temple festivals. I will talk more about it next time, hopefully. The Samaj were the social gatherings. They were held in homes or gardens with food, drink, jugglers, artists, entertainments, etc. And there was Bihar. Bihar meant going out somewhere, whether you went out on a boat cruise, as I had mentioned, or whether you went out to picnic in the woods. So these were the three kinds of parties. Now remember that there were, since life was led through the Vedatrayi and through the solar sanskar, for each of the sanskars, for birth or for Upanayanam or for everything or for Vivah, of course, there was a Bhoj, there was a party. So these were the social rituals, this was a social glue which kept everyone together. So there was gossip, discussion, there was also some kind of intellectual element to it, poetry, and people would recite their own poetry or they would talk about their intellectual attainment. So think of it as a salons of the French, some kind of thing like that. All these were part of entertainment through parties. Now, these were done at home, they were also done in the public sphere. So, there were gatherings in the marketplace, there were eating houses, and eating houses were of different kinds depending on what they sold and depending on what kind of people went there. There were also drinking houses. Drinking houses were very, very important, and Kautilya spends a lot of time on drinking houses, who should run them, how much money should you get out of them. There was also, of course, you remember, a particular secretary or minister or department for alcoholic beverages. So these drinking houses were very, very important. Then there were beautiful gardens, public gardens as well as private gardens. Then there were rivers, lakesides, and people met for, suppose a group of women went together for a bath. So that was also a social occasion. So perhaps a little different, but the main thing was that people met each other a lot, perhaps more than we do now. And that was one of the major ways in which they entertained themselves. Something that I would like to focus on today is theatre. We have a fabulous and wonderful tradition of theatre. It is a special feature of ancient India, and again, I keep mentioning this, the roots are in the Rigveda. The roots of almost everything are in the Rigveda, and so also for theatre. But there is a special Natya Shastra, which is called the fifth Ved. This Natya Shastra is meant for everyone. It is high aesthetics philosophy made into entertainment for everyone. It is said to have been composed around the time of the Mormons. And a lot of things which were, the tradition has been there. It has been there in the Vedic tradition, Itihas, Quran, everything. But the Natya Shastra is said to have been formalized during the time of the Mormons. So again, this was lost in the mists of time, but it was, some excerpts were published in 1865. The full version was only published in 1894, and it is only then that a lot of things were understood to have been formalized in Indic aesthetics a very long time ago in the form of the Natya Shastra. So, in the Indic tradition, Bharat Muni wrote this on the instructions of Lord Brahma. Lord Shiva added his inputs and sharpened the role of women. So, there are three traditions of theatre: the Brahma tradition, the Shiva tradition, and the Vishnu tradition. The Brahma tradition is the Rangashala, the theatre of kings. So they constructed a theatre. The construction was a very specific thing. All the measurements, all the technicalities are there in the Natya Shastra. This was the Brahma tradition. Let me show you a stylized interpretation of this theatre. This is how it was. And don't think that any of the things here are just by the way or just for decoration. Everything that has been made there is according to certain specific instructions. And all the features that you can see have been described in the Natya Shastra. And over here, a dance performance is going on, and there are people, some sit on the floor, some sit on asanas. These are all as described. And it is said that the only extant theatre which we find today is found in Ramgarh, the Ramgarh caves. So there is an extant theatre also with a little inscription on the wall, and that theatre is perhaps the only extant one which we have from ancient India. It was in the form of a cave. So it is a cave theatre because the shape of the cave was the same as you can see over here, kind of semicircular thing. And you can see pictures and read about the Ramgarh cave theatre. So this is the Brahma tradition. These Rangashalas were made by rich people, the king, or rich courtiers, or rich merchants. What is the other one? The next one is the Shiva tradition. Now, Lord Shiva had added his inputs to the theatre tradition. What did he add? He added basically the inputs, the role of women actors became much more. He added a few vrittis like the Kashiki vritti, he added Tandav Nritya, and he added the Parvati Las. All these things were added in the Shiva tradition. Now, Lord Shiva is a different kind of god. He's an organ. He is everywhere. He does not look for formal things like Rangashala. So, this is the very grassroots tradition of theatre, which is in the open, which is in the drinking houses, which is with the wandering artists. And it is for everyone, anyone on the streets, poor, rich, in the bazaars, everywhere. The Rangashala, by the way, was only by special invitation and admission. Anybody who wanted could not go there. So I will show you a Shiva tradition. This is what it is. You see, this is out in the open, and see the difference in the content also, and see the way people are watching. There are some who are sitting in their drinking houses. There are some who are just standing, loitering, doing nothing. So this is a more open, inclusive, for everyone kind of tradition. And there is yet another one, which is the Vishnu tradition, and that is the one which is connected to temples. So dance, music, theatre, we know, are very closely connected to temples. So this is the Vishnu tradition. Now the temple that you see in the center of this illustration is an actually existing, the remains of this temple at Vidisha actually exist. This is one of the oldest extant temples of India. The rest of the scene has been discussed and imagined by me and the illustrator. The temple is as it stands, and this is the way that the theatre tradition was connected to temples. The stories were connected to our Mahabharata, Ramayana, Purans, to the Devis and Devtas. And can you guess what is the subject of the play over here? Of course, it is Samudra Manthan. This is the subject of the play which is being held over here. So this is the Vishnu tradition. There is also yet another thing that we must remember as far as the theatre tradition is concerned. That the tradition which originates from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So we know that there are different kinds of nataks with epic heroes, and the Ramayana is one very popular one. Still exists in the form of Ram Leela. So this tradition also, which is very closely associated with the Ramayana, the associations with the Mahabharata, some of them have left our shores but are very much alive in Southeast Asia. So the tradition of theatre which emanates from the Mahabharata is at a low level in India, but in Southeast Asia it is still very vibrant. But our Ram Leelas still exist and they are still very, very popular. Now, I have been talking to you about the very, what can I say? I mean, only those things which are connected with Devis and Devtas, etc. But there were also stories connected to normal people, not just epic heroes and gods, but normal people. So there were playwrights. Bhas is a modern playwright. Thankfully, we still have 13 of his plays which survive, so we can read them and know something about it. Other than that, there is a story tradition called the Badkaha. This Badkaha was written somewhere 600-700 years before the Common Era. It does not exist any longer. It was written in Prakrit. It is now lost. However, thankfully for us, dissensions of this in different Indian languages, in Sanskrit, in Tamil, in Marathi, they exist. Although they are much later, 9th, 10th, 11th century, the Katha Sarit Sagar, Brihat Katha Manjari, the Perun Kottai, all these still exist, so we can kind of reconstruct it. So these stories of common people, fancy stories of people who went to faraway lands, or small stories of people who lived in Kashi, Mathura, all these were there. And all your stories of, the Thousand and One Nights, Arabian Nights, all these are from this Badkaha. I will again add my, the ditto rider for everything, that this also must have originated in the Rig Veda, because the Rig Veda mentions stories of common people called the Gatha Narshamsi. And the similarities between the content of the Gatha Narshamsi and this Badkaha and the stories which we can still read in different Indian languages are too strong to be missed. So this is a general statement of what was there during the time. What about the specifics from the Arthashastra, which is what we are concentrating on? So there is a lot of description of artists and performers of different types. Nat, Nartak, Vadak, and there is a description of Preksha Grihas or theatres, the Rangshalas that I've mentioned. Remember, there were Sri Prekshas and Purush Prekshas. So there were different ones also. Apart from the mixed ones, there were also separate theatres for women and theatres for men. There are certain shloks and texts from the Arthashastra describing these, which again you can see if you go to check out Morello, then you will be able to see this. So the importance of entertainment and theatre and artists was such that there are instructions in the Arthashastra about where these wandering parties of actors and actresses can go, when they can go, not during the sowing season because people are not to be distracted. Sowing and harvesting season not allowed. But otherwise, they used to travel, they used to stay in a village. The village would take care of everything, their food, their lodging, and they would also pay for them. to set up their own performance, and everyone who paid would be able to watch. So this is all there in the Arthashastra. So there are also parallels between the Natya Shastra and the Arthashastra, because Nritya, Natya, Geet, Vadya, Patya. What is this? Nritya, dance. Natya is acting. Geet is singing. Vadya is instruments. And Patya is poetry. All these are mentioned in the Natya Shastra and parallelly in the Arthashastra. What are the other entertainments mentioned? Gambling, dicing, then the houses of Ganikas, the dancing houses of the Roop Jivikas and the Ganikas. All these are also mentioned in the Arthashastra. And I've already told you that Mauryan specifics can be gleaned not just from the Arthashastra but also from Ashokan inscriptions. So I was telling you that they have given the dimensions of different kinds of roads. So one, say for chariots, these were called Rathya. Then there were roads called Dronmukh. So I am right now telling you about the specifics mentioned in the Arthashastra. So the descriptions of these named kinds and sizes of roads were there. So there were also special places for foreign travelers, because a lot of people came to modern India. A lot of people went out from modern India. There was a lot of. I must actually, let me show you something which I haven't. I will show you the international trade routes, and you will see how India was connected to the world. So foreign travelers were a very important part of the city. See, this is how India was connected to the world. The little dots that you see, those are the sea routes. And just in your own mind, remember that over here was a Uttar Path, and from the Uttar Path, there were connections to the Gulf, then there were connections to Europe, to the left, and to the right, there were connections to Southeast Asia, Japan, China. All these have been mentioned in many texts in and around the modern period. So foreign travelers were a very important section, and there were many special things done by the Mauryans for foreign travelers. And then I've already told you that lots of boats, cruises, etc. These are also specifically mentioned in the Arthashastra. So this is as far as travel is concerned, and I think I will end travel over here.
Surendraji wishes to know about the inequality, if it existed in the Mauryan Empire, between a commoner and richer class and middle class.
Okay. So this is a question which can be answered by looking at some of the remains that we have found from that period, and also looking at texts. So in certain areas, we have found remains of the houses of common people. So we can see how they were built, how they lived, and what they ate. Similarly, there are mentions in different texts. So, in my considered opinion, inequality as a problem per se did not exist. Although there were certainly very rich people, because there were kings, courtiers, rich merchants, and of course there were farmers. Then there would also be people, perhaps landless laborers who only work for the farmers. Also, if I were to answer this question for the Mauryan period alone and not for ancient India as a whole, the Mauryan administration, and you can read it in a number of places, made special efforts to help those who were needy and poor. So the differences in the situation of the rich and poor were mitigated by actions of the state. So perhaps the first welfare state that existed in history was the Mauryan state. There are many inscriptions, the Mauryan inscriptions, which tell you exactly what they did for the people who needed these things. There are lists of such actions in the Arthashastra. I told you for indigent women, they had textile weaving, and there are many other examples of what is to be done. Now, what were the other problems that would beset Indians in the ancient past? Calamities, droughts. So the crop failed. So there were special actions taken for this, as in there were storehouses of granaries, etc., and food, grains, All these were given to people who needed them. Not only do we know it from texts, but a very interesting inscription has survived. It is a stone inscription. I think it is at Piprahava, which describes that these are the granaries, and now you have to take out this much and give it to this one because of this reason. So there is special thought expended on what to do when negative things happen, when the crop fails, when someone does not have enough to eat, when someone does not have shelter. It is a specific feature of the modern state to think about these things and to mitigate these. Uh, well, it's very interesting to note. Chandragupta became the king at around 25 years of age, so says legend. And he abdicated the throne in favor of his son Bindusar when he was around 50. Again, so says religion. Why? Because there was a long, multi-year drought which had struck the Mauryan kingdom. And the Mauryan kingdom had been fighting hard against it. You see a lot of things in the Arthashastra about how to distribute things to people, how to raise resources for these kind of actions. So there was a long fight, and it is said, legend says that Chandragupta was so unhappy and so sorrowful at this drought that he gave up his kingdom and he became a Jain monk and he went to Shravan Belavik. This is an aspect of the Mauryans which needs to be really studied and written down properly, because they had a very special focus, and Chanakya Kautilya had a special focus on saving the kingdom from calamities. And if you read chapter 8 on calamities, many of these calamities are the things that contribute to inequalities in the ancient past. And he had a kind of mitigating feature worked out for most of these things. So it is my considered opinion that inequality would not have been the kind of problem that it is. Also, you read a play. For example, if you read a play of Bhas, then he describes common people also. So the way in which common people are described, are they in distress? Are they, hungry? Are they being exploited? No, they're not described like that. It is like I mentioned a little while ago, it is a very prosperous society which is being described. And in this prosperous society was a special focus on countering all the negative things, especially negative economic things which happened. And therefore, I would definitely say this should not have been a problem.
In the map which you showed, the Hastinapur was falling under the eastern side of India. However, wasn't it supposed to be in the Delhi region? So, if you can
Sorry?
just clarify.
No, Hastinapur, I'm sorry, maybe the map is not clear. Hastinapur is where it is. It's where Delhi is. It's not in the eastern side. So maybe, when we make an artistic representation of India's map, things are not exactly where they are. But no, I am not positing anything revolutionary about Hastinapur. It's very much in Delhi region.
Okay. And also, just to add on to Surendraji's question, if you can just share a bit about if there was any contingency planning which the Mauryan Empire
What
used.
planning? Sorry, Shruti, what planning?
Contingency planning with
Oh,
regard
yes.
to any natural calamities or anything.
Yes. There is an entire chapter, like I said, chapter 8. So, chapter 8 has things like, if X happens, then what do you do? If Y happens, then what do you do? Also, if X happens to element A, what do you do? If X happens to element B, element 2, and element 3, who do you look after first? For this, I don't know, maybe I can just, read a bit, but yes, contingency planning is, I think, it is the strong point of Cotton. So he thinks of all kinds of things which may happen, starting with the king may be a fool, to all the things that can beset all the 7 elements of the Saptang state. And he keeps saying, if this happens, for example, what will he say? That suppose something happens to the waterworks. Now, waterworks are very important for irrigation, for people to drink water, etc. So he will have a description of what must you do and how must you deal with it. So contingency planning is given in chapter 8, and a whole description of the kinds of problems that beset cities, kingdoms is there. And it's a lot, should be difficult to tell you. But chapter 8 of Arthashastra.
Okay.
If you read volume 2, chapter 8, this will answer your question very well. Because they also tell you what to do. See, suppose the king is stupid, or the king is blind, or the king is really what to do. Then suppose, the people of the Janpad are a bad lot. So they're too angry, they have too many vices, then what to do? That is another part of this one. Then suppose the kingdom is not able to raise any resources. What happens if the treasury is going bankrupt? Then what to do? So you see, he has a very fertile and versatile mind, and he comes up with many more calamities than we can do them. And I think more or less most calamities would have been covered in this particular chapter 8. So yes, contingency planning on all the 7 elements of the state, very well done.
Natya Shastra, you said that, I think this is what I heard, that it came about around the Mauryan time.
Because
Okay, now-
see, Natya Shastra was a huge, long tradition.
Right.
And there were, before Bharat Muni, there were so many other gurus who he mentions
Got it.
in the Natya Shastra itself. And
Okay.
the inception of Natya is in the Rig Veda.
True.
And there
So
is a long tradition. If you are very interested, you should listen to 2 people, Radha Vallabh Tripathi and Bharat Gupta. You
Okay.
will find both of them on YouTube, and they have excellent talks on Natya Shastra, these details. And if you want to know the different traditions, especially Radha Vallabh Tripathi on the Natya Shastra, is really worth listening to.
Participant had asked about the location of Hastinapur. Please excuse me, that is a bit of artistic license because those maps are all drawn by hand by me, and therefore sometimes the location Kashi may not be where it is and Hastinapur may not be where it is.
Yes, we are not trying to change the geography of India at all. It's just human representation, that's all.
Because we have so few artistic references to go by, and believe me, every image that I have drawn for Morilok, for Sumedha, has come after a very sort of intense discussion and reading so many books which Sumedha throws it.
But my knowledge about Arthashastra is just limited to the title of that whole treatise, nothing beyond that. So, in that context, what I have read in 1 or 2 places that Arthashastra mostly it talks about how the society or the king or the kingdom should be operated, governed, or people should operate and govern themselves and all of that, rather than how it was happening at that time.
So that is why, if you notice, when I speak, I tell you that this was written in the Arthashastra, and these are also the other corroborating places from where we get evidence to show that such and such a thing was happening. One of the major sources for modern India is the inscriptions. The modern inscriptions that you find from Afghanistan to Madurai and Saurashtra to Chandraketugarh. Other than that, there are also remains. And other than that, there are kind of epigraphic, because you have some epigraphy, that is inscriptions that you find, the one I told you about, granaries, etc. That is an inscription. And that inscription ties in with what is written in the Arthashastra. So you have to read the Arthashastra. You are right, and whoever wrote it is right. The Arthashastra is a manual.
Right.
It's a manual. It is not a description of such and such, Chandragupta did this and Ashok did this. So you will always notice that I mention the Arthashastra and I give you corroborating evidence from many different places. Another very important place is the Indica of Megasthenes. Megasthenes had come to India during the time of Chandragupta, and he had left a detailed description of Indian society, polity, cities, everything. The book is lost, but there are excerpts from it written by other people who came later, like Strabo, Justin, etc. You can read those and reconstruct the Indica and reconstruct what was there. For example, the different departments I told you about, they are mentioned in the Arthashastra. How do you know that they were there? They were there because Megasthenes mentions them.
Okay. Got it.
And also, if we are to talk about all the sources of evidence, we have sources of evidence also in terms of the Sanskrit Nataks of the time, that is the Natak of Bhas. So from there, you can glean a lot about society and polity. And you have to see, I said right at the beginning of the last talk that there are certain 5 or 6 sources of evidence for all historic reconstruction. You have to use all of them in a very considered way, and you have to corroborate with each other. If you read this, can you corroborate it with that inscription? If you read this, can you find a remain? If I told you that wattle and daub houses were made, or brick and mud houses were made, how do I know it? Because certain remains have been found. If I told you that such and such a thing was eaten, and I am telling you because there is the shlok in the Arthashastra, there are also remains of such grains found in the different layers of the excavations.
Okay.
Okay, so
Got
the
it.
Arthashastra is a kind of structure. It's a manual. It's a outline. We fill in the picture by using all different kinds of
Other evidences.
sources.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm reading Ramayana again and Balkand, and I could see there's a beautiful description of Ayodhya done by Valmiki, where he even goes to the extent that how the city is laid out, how wider the roads are.
Okay,
And,
I'll send you the reference.
Yeah, and I look forward to the session where you'll talk about the women as well, because the Ramayana gives a very beautiful description where it says that women are free to move anywhere in the city without any fear. So that is one part. One part where I wanted to know is for the Janpad part. So Ramayana says there is a Janpad, then there is the jungles, and in the jungle you have the ashrams. So the ashram don't come under the Janpad. However, the king is supposed to protect them, right? So
no. So for as far as you see, when these 7 elements are concerned, there are many people who have theorized about them, and there are many people who have described them. We are focusing on Kautilya's definition, and in Kautilya's definition, forests and hermitages are very much part of the temple. It is definitely true that if you read about the Saptang state in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and in certain other sources, people have their differences. And many of those differences are also mentioned in many chapters of the Arthashastra. That such and such person said this, but I don't agree.
In a section, again, a translation I'm reading, where it says there a section of the society had experimental buildings.
And
which
what?
means experimental buildings, which means these were the buildings which were not designed the traditional way. Again, I'm referring to Ramayana. So does that mean that?
Oh, that's very possible, because when we when I talk to you about, I hope I have enough time, about Vastu Shastra and Shilpa Shastra. So that was the art and science of construction. And in that art and science of construction, there were certain rules laid down. You could also use those rules in many, many novel kind of ways. And many different kinds of dwellings have been described in so many of the texts. So that's absolutely acceptable, probably was done, and no surprises there.
Right. So does that mean people used to travel even to gain this knowledge from elsewhere? Like the architects, were they, like the business people, were they also used to travel and gain the knowledge about how to make different houses and other things?
Yes, absolutely. And all this, is again, if you read a lot of texts based around that time, and you get a sense of the way people operated, and you get a sense of the way people worked, and there was collaboration. There was meeting of different kinds of technical people, different kinds of intellectual people, and this was supported and encouraged by kings, merchants. So there was a lot of intellectual exchange. So this intellectual exchange happened not only for abstract things, but also for technology. Now, one of the coming up episodes of Morelok is going to be on the technologies of the period. And those will take in some of the questions that you're raising. And again, if you are interested in this area, I can give you a suggestion. Go to the IIT Gandhinagar channel. There is an IKS series done by Michel Danino. In one of the years, I think it was 2020, he concentrated on technology. So many of the questions that you're asking about architects, about the way things were designed, you may find answers over there. And that's a section which you will find very interesting. Actually, the whole, I would suggest that all the people who are here, they can go to IIT Gandhinagar website, and Michelle Danino does this really wonderful IKS series by very good scholars. Watch those. And watch my upcoming episode on technology.
It was about roads, and I just wanted to know whether, because you stated that the roads were at right angle and there was a kind of town planning which was very well laid out. So my question was that, is it a continuation from the Harappan and Mohenjo-daro settlements and the society?
Very, very likely, because there have been some people who have worked on the continuities of the measurements and ratios and proportions used during the Harappan period, during the Saraswati Sindhu period. For this, I would suggest you read some of Subhash Kak's works. He's done a lot of work in this area.
I've heard from somewhere that the sari came from Helena, who's Chandragupt's wife.
In no historic document, source, text, evidence is the name of the person Chandragupta married actually written. Where do we get this information that there was a marital alliance between Chandragupta and Seleucus? We get this information from that same lost Greek source. Does it say that this one married this one? No. In fact, what it says is that elephants were exchanged, land was exchanged, and marital relations between the Mauryans and the Seleucids were established. Please, if possible, delete Helena from Wikipedia. I am just, I get a lot of this, but no, Wikipedia says Helena was Chandragupta's wife. And Tanya, I mean, whoever has written this has made it up out of whole cloth. Like I told you, the sari has a very different kind of trajectory. We have explored some of that trajectory. Chandragupta's wife probably existed, whether it was Helena or anyone else, but she did not wear a sari. If she was there, she wore a uttariya, antariya, and kayaband. The sari, as we know, has developed over the ages. And actually, this kind of sari is Jorasanko's women. And the other kind, there's so many different kinds of saris even today. Kurgi people wear a different sari. The other people, Gujarati people wear a different sari. So no, Helena had nothing to do with it. Helena doesn't exist.
Okay.
I don't have patience with Wikipedia, otherwise I would go there and delete it myself. TV serials, well, they influence people a lot, and somehow they seem to think that it is all correct. Such as like C'est La Vie,